As we continue then to reflect on South Africa 30 years on, yesterday marking 3 decades since the South Africans of all races voted for the first time. Now, let's reflect on South Africa's journey 30 years on with political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe as well as Sandile Swala. Let me thank you both for your time this afternoon. I'm going to start with you, Professor Seepe. I mean, listening to some South Africans that we've been chatting to here on the channel about their reflections 30 years on, some say that they are excited about the freedom that South Africa has achieved since 1994, despite the challenges that the country is currently facing, while others say for them, the picture appears to look bleak. Briefly for you, share your reflections of South Africa 30 years on.
First, we must not underestimate the impact of 1994. 1994 brought to an end centuries of colonialism and apartheid to African people that affected them negatively. So we must not undermine that moment. And secondly, 1994 was also pregnant with hope. And that hope was expressed in many of the documents that also came from the ruling party. One promise is that of having a legitimate government, a government that exists on the basis of the will of the people, which was entrenched in when you talk about democracy, but also in the Freedom Charter, and which was also a struggle that the people like Mandela, Sisulu, and Oliver Tambo talked about. So we should not undermine that notion of legitimacy. And for the last 30 years, most of our, if not all, our elections have been held to where we can actually say they were free and fair, in a sense that says the will of the people has been expressed. The fact that the people may not be happy with the outcome, but it doesn't take away that promise of freedom, of legitimacy. So that's the first thing. Then the second promise of the democracy was the redress of the past injustices. And when we talk about the injustices, we're also talking about a system that affected African people specifically and black people in general. It was not about individuals. And the TRC, unfortunately, created a scenario where the beneficiaries of apartheid were somehow excused. It became the people who were punished or who were put on the dock were largely individuals, whereas apartheid was a system that affected all black people. So it was not those who were engaged in the struggle, all of us were affected, and the redress was supposed to take the same shape. So that's the first question, the notion of redress of injustices. And that also includes the redress in terms of issues of land. Now, the last one is the issue of leveling the playing field in terms of the economy. Yeah. And it was very clear from the ANC that the notion of political liberation without economic liberation will be meaningless. And so those were the promises.
I'm going to get to economic freedom and, juxtapose that also with the land question as well during the course of our discussion. But Mr. Swana, for you, how much of redress would you say has been done looking at the past 30 years?
Thank you so much, Bongiwe and your viewers. Indeed, we accept that there is liberation in terms of the political system and to a degree the state security system not arresting us anymore. However, when it comes to the tangibles that must be delivered, I've got 6 points which I will not get into here for now. I think that the elected government, being the ANC across 8 provinces and nationally, as well as the DA in the Western Cape, all of those elected governments have failed to deliver the tangibles that took us out of the classroom in 1976. They've actually failed to deliver.
And how much then of a conversation, listening to what Prof had to say, and I'm going to come back to you, Prof, with this one as well. How much would you say, Mr. Swana, then, can we talk about this conversation of redress 30 years on, looking at the issue of land that continues to be one of the thorny issues that we're still facing in South Africa?
When we look at the issue of land, our people are known to be the ones who are occupying squatter camps. When you see a squatter camp, the squatter camp has got a black face. when you see a proliferation, a spread, an urban sprawl of RDP houses, those houses are for black people. I don't know whether they are matchboxes or whatever they are, but when you look at what the white regime did when it was housing whites, poor whites, these suburbs that we live in proudly now today, the educated blacks and all that, were solving the problem of poor whites. Look at how they are. Our people are being contained in slums. If you talk about the ownership of commercial property in terms of office blocks, shopping centers, and so on, black people are nowhere in that field. If you look about the ownership of mineral rights in South Africa and actual mines, actual ownership of the profits of the mines for private benefit, black people are nowhere. So if you look at farming land, black people are nowhere, especially commercial farming land. We are nowhere. And a lot of the lack of transformation of land ownership in South Africa and the successful operation of land by blacks has been hampered first and foremost by immorality of the comrades and their corruption, wanting to make profits together with white elites and landowners and so on. It has not been because the Constitution does not allow, as Dikgang Moseneke has correctly pointed out, supported in that argument by Advocate Dukai Tobi, that we could have gone a long, long distance with land reform. But because comrades are so greedy, they've neglected that job.
What does it mean then, Prof, if people 30 years on are still fighting for land, are still fighting for participation in the economy at a greater scale?
Well, what it means, the numbers speak for themselves, but it also means that somehow there's been major missteps by the ruling party. Or to put it bluntly, as Sandile puts it, that there's been a failure. So there is no way that we should move away from that position of failure, because when we were excited about voting, we were very clear that when we talk about the better life for all, among other things, it would be the land issue, which was very central in any colonial system, removing, and also even under apartheid. And we know how our people simply moved without, through a stroke of a pen. Suddenly, you no longer own the land that your forebears had bequeathed to you. So that is the reality. So what we've seen was the failure of imagination, even beyond the failure of implementation. But as Sandile says, nothing in the Constitution prevented us. You have some of our people who have been co-opted, people who were microwaved into becoming millionaires overnight. And when you look at the behavior of those people, you don't see their behavior to be in tune with the aspirations of our own democracy and our own liberation struggle. You find them actually being the ones who give arguments that you often find white people presenting why black people should not get land. We even have institutions that have been created that tells you that black people do not want land. But the presentation and description by Sandile also points to what you call land hunger. Our people do not want to live in squatter camps, but they occupy those small places simply because the land is not in their hands. You just need to go to rural areas. You'll find the people who have a sense of ownership. Look at the houses that they build. They don't build squatters. They build big houses because they have a sense of that they will not be removed overnight. But when you have a sense of land insecurity, you do not know that the shack that you build will not be those tomorrow. So you're not going to start investing in that. So that is one thing that has happened. There's been a failure of imagination. But there's also been a dwelling failure, which the numbers indicate. In terms of income, the notion of black poverty, it is still black. The notion of unemployment is still black. And it's even worse when you talk to African youth. We're talking, it hovers over 60%. And when you have that, it means that those young people cannot look to the future with a great excitement. So that failure is something that we must acknowledge, in as much as we acknowledge that politically there's been a form of liberation, also that the harassment that we used to experience under apartheid is no longer there. But there is something that destroys the soul, is when you cannot feed your own family. Yes, you will have the notion that I'm a man, I'm a woman, but how do you go back home and you find children who are hungry? That is what we need to do to deal with what Sanjila calls the tangibles, the concrete, not these nice ideas of the state of being free at the mental level. It is only when we deal with the main issues that Maslow's hierarchy of needs talk about: shelter, freedom from hunger. And unfortunately, we have not made progress in that space.
So, Prof, yesterday I was in conversation with some analysts, and all three of them, say that maybe it's time to have CODESA 2. And for them, they believe that this particular, forum would then be, basically make it possible for everyone, including those that don't agree with one another, to sit at the table, take stock, and really discuss where South Africa finds itself right now and where it goes to next. I'd like to hear from both of you if you do agree with this particular notion. I'll start with you, Mr. Swan.
Yes, thank you. And in fact, to be sincere, from my perspective, General Bantu Olumisa has mentioned this idea many times over, including the establishment of a government of national unity. One of the reasons why we need this, really and truly, a CODESA, you must remember that some of the true revolutionaries have been sidelined. If you read Mbeke's letter, he identifies counter-revolution and perhaps related counter-revolutionaries. And if you go, whether you are talking to the EFF or the Zuma party, the MK party, they also identify counter-revolutionaries. So there is a need to say, guys, let's reset. Because this whole thing has been infiltrated and sold out left, right, and center. Let's reset and start everything from scratch. And I'll make some examples that baffle the mind. As we speak today, I was looking at these statistics. In one study, it says, a study released this week found that nearly 80% of grade 6 maths teachers could not do what the curriculum expected of the pupils in their classes. Teachers cannot pass the sums that they are asking students to do. Now, you have to be the devil incarnate to put a teacher who cannot teach mathematics into a class to teach that. So that needs a restart, complete restart. And the last statistic I'll give you, which I got from Padile Huka, he says that in the States SA community survey show that for every one person completing a degree in 2016, there were 6 whites. But in the 1970s, it was 1 black, 1.25. We're basically on par. So since this government took over, we have regressed more than 300% in education as black. So our poverty is now, at a level that you cannot imagine. So comrades have got to humble themselves, and they've got to bring in the people that they rejected, the Azapos of this world, the PACs, and other genuine revolutionaries, even from the mass democratic movement, who have been cut out, the Alan Busacks and others. So we need to restart the whole thing.
And Prof, for you, a final one then briefly.
The numbers speak for themselves, and what it does call for is for us that CODESA, but we must also realize that we were outsmarted during the negotiations. So one of the things that we have not been wanting to accept, because we wanted to come out there pretending that all is well, all was not well. And when we started revisiting in the same constitution, you'll find that the people who are anti-transformation use the very same constitution, use the same courts to undermine the direction of transformation. And this is why early on, Mandela himself raised these issues about the role of the civil society, which are funded overseas, who spend more time even taking government to court so that the government is not able to move an inch. So we need to try to understand what are those issues. But we must also accept that we got too excited about what 1994 was, whereas it was simply a compromise. We did not win. And we assumed, because of our political naivety or our goodness, that those who have oppressed us will see the need to work together and create a new society that Mandela dreamed of, a non-racial, prosperous, and democratic society, where there was issue of equality. We bought into that. But what happened, they went into the lager and made sure that they entrenched the inequalities. Even if you take the universities that used to claim to be pro-change are the ones that are digging to make sure that there's no transformation. You just have to look at all liberal English-speaking universities and you look at the number of academics who are in senior positions. You go also into the industry. Almost 80% of the senior leadership is mainly white. And that does not come as an accident. It means the people who make those decisions make sure that does not happen. So when we go back to Togesa 2, then we're going to be bringing all these issues that where did we go wrong? But we have gone wrong. And so far, for the young person born in 1994, they have not seen the promise of democracy. They only hear it. What they know is that it is not realizable in their lifetime.
All right. Let me thank you both for your reflections. I do appreciate them this afternoon. That was a political analyst, Professor Sipho Seepe, as well as Santi Leswana.